Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Cheyenne, Kay, and Evelina. Nice to see you both. Be with you in a minute. I have to share a little bit first. So please hang out for a while. Hi, everybody. Hi, Lana. Hi, Susan Eldridge. And hi, two other people who've joined. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so it's a little hot under the collar out there tonight. It turns out that there are some, there's a lot of Twitter action surrounding the interaction between the Sanders campaign and the Biden campaign concerning what Biden has said in the past. Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Rob. How are you? And it's getting a little hostile out there, isn't it? Hi, Russ. Great to see you. It's getting a little hostile out there. So, okay, tonight I'm going to go over Biden's record with respect to Iraq and with respect to Social Security. I hope that I need not have to go over his record when it came to the crime bill. He was the main formulator and driver of the crime bill that was passed in 1995, if I recall correctly, which had such a devastating effect. But okay, had a devastating effect on the inner city minorities and particularly blacks, and it just was devastating. Thousands upon thousands of people went to jail for minor offenses because of that particular crime bill. And that is totally on Biden's head, okay, and everybody knows it. Now, when Tulsi attacked Harris, but partly based on her efforts to enforce the crime bill in California, uh, that was part of the reason why she was knocked out of the race. A big part of the reason. Because it absolutely undermined her support, okay, among blacks where she was supposed to be strong. For some reason, that issue hasn't surfaced yet with respect to Joe Biden. But I suspect that's because Tulsi hasn't been in many debates since then. Anyway, could be that, okay, is one of the reasons for that, but it's probably also true that Sanders hasn't wanted to go after Warren after Biden, okay, until now. Sanders has been working the campaign in a very positive way with kid gloves until very recently. Now he's starting to show the contrasts, and others are screaming like stuck pigs. That's probably what started the fight with Warren. She probably figured she just had to get something on Bernie, and what better thing to get than to accuse him of sexism? So all the Hillary people, I'm sorry, all the Hillary people would be able to pillory Bernie for sexism. Russ says, better late than never. Evening, Dr. Joe. Giant says, Warren just approved Trump's horrific trade deal. Big surprise. Not. Yep, she did vote for the trade deal. And certainly, if Biden had been around in the Congress, he would have voted for that trade deal too. He loves conciliating the Republicans. Rob says, I love how Warren is not the thing to talk about now on two important things. It's a policy dispute on Social Security, and two, it's with Biden and not Warren. Yeah, the reason why people are not actually talking Warren right now is because they're probably sitting around and waiting to see whether the era of one weekend ago, okay, and the debate on Tuesday will by itself sink her campaign. They're waiting to see what's going to happen. Okay, but Bernie had to turn to Biden anyway, because Biden was retaining too much strong support, okay, among blacks all over the country, and also seniors. And there's no reason for either. He's a terrible candidate from the standpoint of his record on black issues, and also from the standpoint of his record on senior issues, specifically with respect to his Social Security cuts. Okay, now he's also awful when it comes to foreign policy. And I want to start off with an article entitled Biden's Pack of Lies that appeared in Counterpunch. And I'm going to take you to that right now. Here we are. And this article was done on January 14, 2020. It was written by Sam Hosseini. It's called Biden's Pack of Lies About the Iraq War. And there's a nice picture of Joe with a nasty look on his face. He was the Foreign Relations Committee chairman in 2002, and he made a floor speech defending his vote for the resolution on the Iraq War that was passed by Congress. So this article was written in part to counter what John Kerry had said, because John Kerry was continuing to falsely claim that Joe Biden was not in favor of the invasion of Iraq. The Sanders camp has rightly highlighted more documentation, including video, of Biden's support for the invasion after it happened, like his statement about the Brookings Institution in 2003. His statement about President Bush that Biden made at the Brookings Institution in 2003, when he said, quote, "The President of the United States is a bold leader, and he is popular," unquote. So Sam Hosseini says it's the tip of the iceberg. And he says that the address to Brookings, and he gives a link to a video, itself contains brazen pro-war falsehoods, with Biden claiming that Saddam violated every commitment that he had made. He played cat and mouse with the weapons inspectors. He failed to account for the huge gaps in weapons declarations that were documented by the weapons inspectors from the UN and submitted by them to the UN Security Council in 1998. And every nation in that council believed he possessed those weapons at that time. He refused to abide by any conditions. And Sam Hosseini says it's a pack of lies. The Iraqi government released a massive amount of information in 2002. There's a link to that. It agreed to allow the UN weapons inspectors in. There's a link to that. By the way, I remember this at the time myself. Well before the congressional vote that authorized the war. Okay. Now, Bush has claimed the war was justifiable. Or I should say, Biden claimed the war was justifiable to give Bush a stronger hand in getting inspectors into Iraq. Yeah, I remember he made that claim at the time, saying that he voted for the war not because he was really for it, but because he was for giving Bush a stronger hand in getting inspectors into Iraq. And poor him, what Bush did with his vote was to justify the invasion of Iraq, and Biden never meant for that to happen. Anyway, the prior weapons inspection regime, which is the UNSCOM, was ended in 1998, but not because Saddam kicked them out of Iraq. It was ended because Bill Clinton ordered them withdrawn on the eve of his scheduled impeachment vote. And why did Bill Clinton want to do that? Because he wanted to make way for the Desert Fox bombing campaign. and named after Rommel, the German general in the Second World War, the Desert Fox. It's remarkably fitting that the Biden camp has put out John Kerry on this issue, since Kerry's falsifications regarding Iraq are remarkably similar to Biden's. And then Sam Hosseini points out that Kerry might be the Democratic senator who helped get us into the war in Iraq as much as Biden did. This actually led to Kerry's contortions in the 2004 election when he was the nominee of the Democrats and he lost to George Bush. Sam Hosseini questioned Kerry in 2011 about his vote for the Iraq invasion. He claimed, quote, "I didn't vote for the Iraq war. I voted to give the president authority that he misused and abused. And from the moment he used it, I opposed that," unquote. And that's pretty much the same thing Joe Biden said. And Sam Hosseini says that that's another lie. What Kerry did is he actually attacked the idea of a withdrawal from Iraq at that point, even saying in December of 2003, and here's the quote, "I fear that in the run-up to the 2004 election, the administration is considering what is tantamount to a cut-and-run strategy," unquote, which of course effectively takes a position that was even more militaristic than was Bush's at that time. And there's a link to a CNN article from August of 2004, which says Kerry stands by his yes vote on the Iraq war. Hosseini, Sam that is, points out that it's remarkable how little scrutiny Joe Biden has gotten for his role in the Iraq invasion. Sanders has mostly criticized Biden's vote, but Biden was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and has been criticized by leading analysts and weapons inspectors for the hearings he presided over that led to the war. But Tulsi Gabbard, who's viewed by many as an anti-war candidate, by the way, has outright, says Sam, led Biden off the hook. And he says this because Tulsi, at a debate last year, said of Biden, quote, "He was wrong. He said he was wrong," unquote. And Hosseini then goes on, so Biden may be positioned to become the nominee of the Democratic Party and face Trump in the general because of the minimal scrutiny for Biden's major role in the worst policy decision of our lifetime. He's also in a worse position to take on Trump's phony America First isolationism than Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So that is Biden's record on the Iraq War before he became the vice president. Before he became the vice president, he was Bush's handmaiden in the Senate as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. He led the way in supporting Bush at that time. What about his record on Social Security? Well, some of us remember that Joe Biden, of course, was part of the Democratic administration, the Obama administration, namely, that tried to make a deal with the Republicans to cut Social Security beginning in 2008. The process was started at the beginning of 2010. And for years, what the Democrats were trying to do under Obama was to join hands with the Republicans in a bipartisan effort to cut Social Security and also Medicare. And one thing that was outstanding about that was that the sneaky way they were trying to cut Social Security was by putting in a different cost of living index. Specifically, one that would, over a period of time, devalue the food that seniors would be able to eat under the the way that it would devalue the food is if people switched to eating something cheaper. Say they switched from steak to chicken, and then from chicken to tuna fish. The new CPI index that they were trying to get through was a CPI index called the chained CPI. And what it would do is that if it started out at steak, it would adjust things down to where the best that people could buy under Social Security would lower the Social Security amounts, so people could no longer afford the steak, and they would have to buy, say, chicken. And then if people economized still further and went down to tuna fish, then the chain CPI was going to adjust the CPI index, so people would no longer be able to afford chicken, but would only be able to afford tuna fish. Okay, and then of course, if it turned out that the old people would try to economize still more by eating cat food instead of tuna fish, then the chain CPI would again adjust the Social Security payments downward so that all old people would be able to afford was the cat food. It was from this chain CPI index that the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which we always used to like to call the Bowles but Simpson Commission, the BS Commission, but which they like to call the Simpson-Bowles Commission, not because Alan Simpson was senior to Bowles, but because they wanted to avoid by nickname the BS Commission. But instead of getting the nickname of the BS Commission, the name they got was the Cat Food Commission because they relied so heavily on the chained CPI. Now, if I recall correctly, it was Jane Hamsher, who was then the publisher of Fire Dog Lake, which was a very big blog at that time. I think she was the one who first suggested the name Cat Food Commission, which rapidly replaced the BS Commission, but not for me. Okay. But anyway, Biden, as part of the Obama administration, certainly supported the Cat Food Commission at the time, and he continued to support efforts to he continued to support the efforts of the administration to try to construct a compromise with the Republicans, which would cut Social Security and also Medicare as a compromise, which was hoped was going to reduce the deficit in the budget. So it was about reducing the deficit, part of fiscal responsibility as Biden conceived of it and as Obama conceived of it. So here's an article by Ryan Grim. It was written on January 13th of 2020, so a little while ago, and it's entitled Fact Check: Joe Biden has advocated cutting Social Security for 40 years. And this is a stunning article because the research goes back quite a long time. And so I'm going to put this on clearly so we can see it more clearly. And Grimm points out that as recently as 2018, Joe Biden called for cuts to Social Security. And he points out last week Bernie Sanders highlighted Biden's record on Social Security in prosecuting the case that Biden is not the most electable candidate. This article was written before the Tuesday debate. The issue came up in the Tuesday debate, but got very little discussion because so much time was taken up, by CNN in the Biden-Sanders argument. Anyway, after Sanders' campaign newsletter continued the attack on Biden's Social Security record, the Biden campaign complained to fact checkers that his comments were being taken out of context. Placed in context, however, Biden's record on Social Security is far worse than one offhand remark. Indeed, Biden has been advocating for cuts to Social Security for roughly 40 years. Roughly 40 years puts it back to, 1978, 1979. I don't recall that he did this in 1979, but Joe Biden was fairly early on a big fiscal responsibility man, and that's when the fiscal responsibility Democrats were beginning to appear in Congress. Now, actually, Joe Biden appeared in Congress for the first time, if I recall correctly, in 1972. So he was kind of a forerunner of the other fiscal responsibility Democrats. But they were starting to arrive in force by 1978 and 1979, both in Congress and in the Senate. After a Republican wave swept Congress in 1994, Biden's support for cutting Social Security and his general advocacy for an austerity budget made him a leading combatant in the centrist wing battle against the party's retreating liberals in the 1980s and the 90s. And Biden insisted in 1995, he said, hey, when he argued that we ought to freeze federal spending, he meant Social Security as well. He meant Medicaid and Medicare. He meant veterans benefits. Quote, I meant every single solitary thing in the government, and I not only tried it once, I tried it twice. I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time, unquote. That's what Biden said in 1995. Okay, in paren, what Ryan indicates here is that a freeze would have reduced the amount that would be paid out, cutting the program's benefit. So, his advocating for a freeze was advocating for a cut. And Biden continued in 1995, quote, the truth is the last election did one thing. I do not know whether it really made you guys a majority party for long. I do not know. We will find out. I know one thing it did. What it did was it made sure that there was nobody left on the left in my party who, in fact, said, we do not care about actually moving the budget towards balance. Well, that is what happened under Bill Clinton. There were very few, if any, left in my party who, in fact, said, we do not care. Almost everybody gave lip service to the balanced budget mythology and nonsense which we're still living with today. Here's another quote. Oh, that's the same quote, so I'm not going to repeat it. It was tweeted out by Walker Bragman. Biden was expressing a common sentiment among the centrist faction of the parties in 1980s, and 90s. Yes, it was a common sentiment. It was not unusual. It was the order of the day. Biden argued that cutting spending was the only way to salvage what was left of the Great Society and the New Deal. Mentality of Biden-style Democrats that the best the party could do was play defense was dominant for a generation. And Ryan is quite right about that. And about the following. He says it's now being fundamentally challenged, not just in the presidential campaign, but in congressional primaries across the country. Biden himself, at least on his campaign website, now supports making Social Security more generous, not less. But can we trust him? Can we trust him? As Ryan Grim says, that's at odds with decades of his own advocacy. And Grim also points out that this record could become a major political liability among voters concerned that Biden will finally get his wish to trim back Social Security checks. Because about half of black seniors on Social Security rely on it as their primary means of support. Any trimming of the program hits those beneficiaries particularly hard. But it's one thing to focus on blacks, but a large number of white seniors on Social Security also rely on it as their primary means of support. And while it would be nice for Bernie to gain in the demographic of blacks, it would also be nice for him to gain completely across the demographic of seniors. His numbers among seniors are still very low compared to Biden's, and they need to go up. And seniors who are well informed can easily perceive that there's no earthly reason why seniors ought to prefer Joe Biden to Bernie Sanders. There's no reason at all. Bernie Sanders' economic program is much, much better for seniors. I did a live stream actually not too long ago that showed that my family of two, specifically my wife and I, would benefit from a Sanders agenda, the total Sanders agenda, to the tune of more than, what was the figure, $25,000 a year? Or was it $22,000 a year? I have to look it up again. I forget now. But it was a huge amount, or I should say a huge amount. And yes, trimming of the Social Security program would hit us particularly hard, would hit white seniors and black seniors particularly hard. Over the years, Biden, in speeches and interviews, has often taken pains to let listeners know that he's taking an unpopular stance, being explicit about the risk he knows he's taking. Yes, he has bravado. And he said this to Tim Russert on Meet the Press in 2007 while he was running for president. One of the things my political advisors say to me is, whoa, don't touch that third rail. So he was proud of the fact that he was all over the third rail in 2007, just as he'd been during the 1990s. Within this year's presidential contest being fought over the over the terrain of electability, Biden's 35-plus year effort to cut Social Security, arguably the most popular government program in existence, is potentially a major liability among older voters. It is if we can get the word out to older voters. The problem is that the word is not out to them yet, and we need to get it out. There's not a reason in the world why 90% of senior voters should not be supporting Bernie Sanders. Okay, and Ryan Grimm points out, and hypocrisy has never held Donald Trump back for making an effective political attack. Yes. If Biden runs for the Democrats, you'll hear from Trump about all the years Biden ran against Social Security benefits. Biden's historical position also stands in stark contrast to Senators Bernie Sanders and Warren, both of whom support increasing benefits and have offered ways to make the program solvent indefinitely. Of course, here we know, and Ryan Grimm also knows, by the way, he knows it very well. He's talked to Stephanie Kelton on quite a number of occasions, and he's read a number of my posts on that, because I was posting lots on MMT when he and I were with Fire Dog Lake back in 2010, okay, in 2011. And I know he read my stuff because we argued about it some in comments. Okay. Later, since coming to The Intercept, and probably before, uh, he has interviewed Stephanie Kelton, okay, on a number of occasions, and I'm pretty sure now that Ryan is a supporter, okay, of MMT. So he should know that there's no solvency problem with Social Security. The ways that Sanders and Warren, the ways they have offered to make the program solvent indefinitely, are not even necessary. They're good from the standpoint of taxing rich people more. They should be taxed more because inequality is bad and it reduces inequality. But that doesn't change the fact that Social Security solvency has nothing to do with the Social Security Trust Fund. Not really. The trust fund could go to zero, and Social Security could still be funded if the funds were appropriated by Congress. It's about congressional appropriations each year. It is not about what's in the trust fund, which is just an accounting record. It's not even a bank account. It's not even a bank account. It's just an accounting record. As Bernie Sanders himself said in 2015 after all of these quotes, quote, Joe Biden is a man who has devoted his entire life to public service and to the well-being of working families and to the middle class, said uh, Andrew Bates, a spokesperson for Biden. Well, I didn't know that Bernie Sanders himself said in 2015. But, okay, if he did, I'm sure it was pure politics. Anyway, so Grimm says Biden's fixation on Social Security dates back to the Reagan era. One of Reagan's first major moves as president was to implement a mammoth tax cut. Sound familiar? Was tilted toward the wealthy and to increase defense spending. Biden, a Delaware senator, time supported both moves. He supported both moves. The heightened spending and reduced revenue focused public attention on the debt and the deficit, giving fuel to a push for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So what did Biden do? He teamed up with Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley. Old Chuck is, oh no, I guess old Chuck is not still there anymore, is he? Chuck Grassley to call for a freeze on federal spending and insisted on including Social Security in that freeze, even as the Reagan administration fought to protect the program from its cuts. I'm reading, okay, from Ryan now. It was part of the Democratic approach at the time, not just to match Republicans, but to get to their right at times as well. And Grimm points out, as Biden also did on criminal justice policy. Quote, so when those of my friends in the Democratic and Republican parties say to me, how do you expect me to vote for your proposal? Does it not freeze Social Security COLAs? That's the cost of living increases. Are we not saying there will be no cost of living increases for 1 year? Unquote. Biden said, quote again, yes, that is what I am saying, unquote. This was in a floor speech in April 1984. And he was referring to the cost of living adjustment that millions of seniors look for every year. Joe was facing re-election to the Senate in 1984, that is Joe Biden, I mean, not me, which was shaping up to be a heavily Republican cycle. And so he continued returning to the issue of Social Security. His plan with Grassley was backed by a bevy of business trade groups, including the Chamber of Commerce of the U.S., the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Business Executives for National Security, and the National Association of Manufacturers, unquote. The Biden-Grassley plan was ultimately rejected by Congress, but Biden never wavered on it, arguing in 1988 that had he been able to cut Social Security, he'd have been able to save other social programs and force Republicans to cut defense spending. And Biden boasted about that. And he said, quote, I did it for a simple reason. I sat on the budget committee for 11 years. And I'd find the same thing occur every time. We start off with grandiose ideas of how we're going to cut the budget. We would never touch entitlement. We would never touch the defense budget. And we couldn't touch the interest on the debt, which meant that out of $1 trillion budget, that left us only about $156 billion. And what we would do each year is we would go out and cut out education, food stamps, Head Start, welfare payments on down the line. Everything that I cared about got cut, because at the very end we'd say, well, we've got to make some cuts, and that would be the path of least resistance, unquote. And that was Biden's political approach. He thought that by compromising with Republicans, they would respond by compromising in return with him. But that approach has been thoroughly discredited by the last 40 years of events. And as Ryan Grimm says, even though it remains the animating argument of Biden's campaign. And by the way, remember, that was the approach of the Obama administration for so many years. Compromise with the Republicans, and they'll compromise with us, which led to remarks from the leaders of the Republican Party, like, I believe Mitch was still the leader, of the Republican Party in 2014, 2012. And I believe he famously said, or he and Paul Ryan together famously said, well, this is a wonderful compromise with the Democrats. We got 85% of what we wanted. Okay, Obama, of course, was happy to give them the 85%, okay, of what they wanted, because then he could blame his own bad behavior on them, his giving up on them when he ran on things that were completely different. In November of 1995, he again reminded the public of his deficit hawkery. I would refer to it, okay, as terrorism. And he said then, I'm a Democrat that voted for a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. He wants credit for that. I've introduced on four occasions, entire plans to balance the budget. I tried with Senator Grassley back in the 1980s to freeze all government spending, including Social Security, including everything. That's a quote, fellas and girls. When I introduced my budget freeze proposal years ago, the liberals of my party said, quote, it's an awful thing you're doing, Joe. All the programs we care about, you're freezing them. Money for the blind, the disabled, education, and so on, unquote. Biden continued, my argument then is one I make now, which is the strongest, most compelling reason to be for this amendment. That if we do not do that, all the things I care most about are going to be gone. Why? Because Biden believed and still believes that there is a solvency problem connected to the national debt. And he also believes that the deficit and the debt are tightly connected to each other, and you can't have deficits without selling debt instruments. That's what Joe Biden believes even now in 2019. That's not something that was in Ryan's article. The first few months of 1995 were taken up with debate over another GOP-led balanced budget amendment, with Biden arguing forcefully to exclude Social Security from it. Well, that was nice, but not good enough. After the year 2014, he said, we'll be in deficit in the Social Security system, unquote, he warned. It seems pretty clear to me this is about two things. One, they need the Social Security dollars to make the deficit look like it is less than it is. And then the next step is they're going to need to try to deal with changing it to increase the amount of money they get in the trust funds to make the deficit look even less, which means that Social Security is going to get hit, unquote. Biden pushed for an amendment to carve Social Security out of the balanced budget amendment. Clear as it may have been, the amendment to protect Social Security failed. Biden voted for the balanced budget amendment anyway, even after his multiple warnings that it would undercut Social Security. It was, in fact, the argument over Social Security that torpedoed the balanced budget amendment by a single vote on the Senate floor after it had already passed the House. Yeah, Newt passed it. It passed the House. Only reason why it did not pass the Senate was because Social Security was in it. If Social Security had not been in it, as Biden wanted, the Obama administration would have been living with a balanced budget amendment. And it wouldn't have been able to have the stimulus bill of 2009. I mean, inadequate as it was, it stopped that spiraling down of the economy. It did that, at least. It created a few jobs. It may have taken us 6 or 7 years to really get out of the recession, but it was better than nothing. But we would never have been able to run the close to $1 trillion deficit that came out of that bill had we had a balanced budget amendment. Never would have been able to get that. It would have been impossible. We probably would still be in the middle still be in the middle of the Depression if Biden had had his way in those days. Anyway, Biden's inability to bring along one additional Democratic colleague to vote for the balanced budget amendment had saved the program and saved the Constitution from being amended with a draconian fiscal constraint mechanism. It would have left the United States in worse shape than the Eurozone, whose nations could at least run a 3% deficit. The balanced budget amendment would not have let us run a 3% deficit. Ryan points out, ironically, the budget would reach balance anyway by the end of the decade as federal revenue climbed, the result of an economy in hyperdrive thanks to a tech bubble. George W. Bush, of course, turned that surplus into a mammoth tax cut for the wealthy, and within just a few years, Biden was again calling for cuts to Social Security to deal with the deficit. In 2007, he said, the American people know we have to fix Social Security. They know we're going to have to make some tough decisions. You've heard of those before. Tough decisions. You know how many years they've been talking about? We're for tough decisions. Cutting Social Security. Of course, that won't affect us at all. And the reason why it won't is because we have our Senate pensions. We have our Senate pensions. We won't have to live on that Social Security. And we've got big jobs coming after we leave the Senate on K Street. We don't have to worry about Social Security. And Tim Russert asked, quote, Senator, we have a deficit. We have Social Security and Medicare looming. Number of people on Social Security and Medicare is now 40 million people. It's going to be about 80 million in 15 years. Would you consider looking at those programs, age of eligibility, unquote? Biden says, absolutely, absolutely. Tim Russert continues, cost of living, put it all on the table. Biden says the answer is absolutely. And he reminded Russert that earlier in his career, he had been part of the small number of senators who had come up with a deal that raised the retirement age and promised to protect each other from voters outraged at the cuts. And then, here's another quote from Biden. I was one of 5 people. I was the junior guy in the meeting with Bob Dole and George Mitchell when we put Social Security on the right path for 60 years. I'll never forget what Bob Dole said after we reached an agreement about gradually raising the retirement age. It's a bipartisan bill, by the way. When they do something bipartisan, put your hands in your pockets. Otherwise, they're going to pick those pockets. After we reached an agreement about gradually raising the retirement age, he said, quote, look, here's the deal. That's Joe Biden, right? Here's the deal. We all put our foot in the boat one at a time. And he kicked. He stepped like he was stepping into a boat. Quote, and we'll all make the following deal. If any one of the challengers running against the incumbent Democrat or Republicans should attack us on this point, we'll all stay together. Unquote. I'm sure that deal was going to work just as well as the deal that Bernie and Warren may have had to stay together when it came to Medicare for all, right? Somehow that didn't work. Or to stay together when they were being attacked by the neoliberals on the panel. Biden said, that's the kind of leadership that is needed. Social Security is not the hard one to solve. It's Medicare that is the gorilla in the room, and you've got to pull it all on the table. At Iowa's Jefferson Jackson dinner in November 2007, weeks from the Iowa caucus, Biden again came back to Social Security. Quote, the American people know we have to fix Social Security. They know we can't grow our way to a solution. They know we're going to have to make some tough decisions. They're ready to make these decisions. They're ready to step up. We have to be ready to straightforwardly tell them what we're about to do, unquote. As VP, Biden was involved in multiple administration attempts to cut Social Security as part of a, quote, grand bargain, unquote, with the Republicans. I'm sure you remember the grand bargain. Uh, Fortunately, these grand bargains were blocked by the Tea Party Republicans. In fact, we who were supporters of the Democratic Party from time to time, were very lucky over the years. The deal Bill Clinton tried to make with Gingrich to privatize Social Security may well have passed in 1998 or 1999 were it not for the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which saved us. And then after that, Newt Gingrich had a scandal of his own and had to step down. Scandals saved Social Security then. And attempts to cut Social Security as part of the grand bargain was saved from, I don't know, 2011, 2012, through to the end of the Obama administration by the Tea Party Republicans, who couldn't agree to any tax increases. See, what the Democrats wanted to do was to trade tax increases for Social Security cuts. That was part of the grand bargain, and Medicare cuts. And Democrats are willing to do it. The Obama Democrats are willing to do that. This is something seniors need to know. The only reason why it didn't happen was because of the freaking Tea Party idiots. In 2014, Senator Rand Paul said at a conservative event that Biden had privately told him he was supportive of raising the retirement age and means testing Social Security benefits. Quote, I asked the vice president, don't we have to raise the age? Wouldn't means testing and saving the age solve the problem, unquote? Said Rand. And then he added, yes, in private, but will not say it in public. Paul hadn't been paying close attention. A few years later, at the Brookings Institution, in April 1918, Biden addressed Social Security again. He said, quote, Paul Ryan was correct when he did the tax code. What's the first thing he decided we had to go after? Social Security and Medicare. Now we need to do something about Social Security and Medicare, unquote, Biden said. Then added, in a whisper, quote, that's the only way you can find room to pay for it, unquote. Last week, the Biden campaign said to Political Fact that Biden was mocking Ryan and being sarcastic because immediately after his whisper, he went into the kinds of adjustments to Social Security he thought should be made. The same type that Paul said he told him he supported privately. Quote, now, I don't know a whole lot of people in the top 1/10 of 1% or the top 1% who are relying on Social Security when they retire. I don't know a lot of them, quote unquote, Biden said when he alluded to the need to means test Social Security. Quote again. So we need a pro-growth, progressive tax code that treats workers as job creators as well, not just investors, that gets rid of unproductive loopholes like a stepped up basis for taxation, and it raises sufficient amount of revenue to make sure that Social Security and Medicare can stay. It still need adjustments, but can stay and pay for the things we all acknowledge will grow the country. Unquote. And Ryan ends on this note. When the program is popular, then the term adjustment is a Washington by euphemism for cuts. But you can count on Trump to use the more common term. So Biden is out there today denying, for all he's worth, that Sanders and everybody else is distorting his record on Social Security. But I gotta say that I doubt it. Now, here is a thread that appears on Twitter, has appeared on Twitter with lots, of videos. Okay, it's from Bo Knows News, or Bo Erickson of CBS, where Biden criticizes the campaign for pushing a video comparing Biden and Paul Ryan's stances on Social Security. Biden says it's beneath the Sanders campaign, and he hopes, but they're going to disown it. And then Bo Erickson retweets David Sirota, saying, how many times does that Joe Biden have to tell you he wants to cut Social Security for everyone to believe him? And how many video clips have to exist for people to worry that these would likely all be devastating Trump ads if Biden is the nominee of the party? Okay, and then there are many other components, okay, of this particular thread. And how do you get to this thread, which I put a link to in the Facebook description? Want to get to this thread and other major links, you can do a search on hashtag Biden Social Security Cuts. All a single word. The hashtag was produced by David Sirota. I forget what his title is, but he's one of the communications top dogs on Bernie's campaign. And he's great. He's not a neoliberal at all. He's a labor person. And if you don't know who he is, you should learn, because he's really great. And he spins out clip after clip. So go to Twitter, search on the hashtag Biden Social Security Cuts. Just one more little news item before I go on to your comments. This is very important. There was a case being heard by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is considered one of the most liberal courts of appeals in the United States. There's a youth climate case, which was decided there in the Common Dreams article entitled, it's by John Kelly, and it's entitled, Our Planet is Seriously Burning and the Adults Keep on Letting Us Down, quote unquote. And Ninth Circuit throws out the youth climate case. Let me go very briefly through this. This was written on January 18, 2020, today. In this case, which is Juliana versus the United States, it was thrown out on Friday afternoon. Okay, the number of plaintiffs on this case was 21 plaintiffs. It's been in the courts now for a long time. And the lawsuit was thrown out. You had accused the U.S. government of failing its constitutional mandate by refusing to act urgently and responsibly to address the existential threat of human-caused global warming. Sorry about that. Anyway, Julie Olson said this is far from over, quote unquote. The case has been seen as a potential landmark case, not only here, but across the globe. It was not heard by the full Ninth Circuit Court, but by a 3-member panel. The 3-member panel agreed with the plaintiff's argument that the U.S. government has operated as a barrier to climate action, but it concluded that the courts were not the appropriate avenue for their complaint. The ruling was a 2-1 ruling, and the circuit court judge, Andrew Hurwitz, said that even though the panel was convinced by the narrative set forth in the lawsuit, and agreed the climate crisis has brought the world close to the eve of destruction, and that the government's contribution to climate change is not simply a result of inaction. It reluctantly concluded the plaintiff's case must be made to the political branches of government, or to the electorate at large. The dissenting vote, the dissenting opinion, was written by Judge Josephine Staten, or Staten. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. But she said, it is as if an asteroid were barreling towards Earth, and the government decided to shut down our only defenses. Seeking to quash this suit, the government bluntly insists that it has the absolute and unreviewable power to destroy the nation. My colleagues throw up their hands, concluding this case represents nothing fit for the judiciary. Anyway, the group is going ahead with legal action. They're filing a request for an en banc hearing by the full Ninth Circuit, a step in the appeals process that would allow a larger selection of the Ninth Circuit as opposed to the 3-member panel to consider the case. So that's where it stands actually right now. The dissenting opinion by Josephine Staten is actually very, very good. Also, the majority opinion is fairly well argued on the surface, but it seems clear to me, after reading the two opinions, that the case could have been decided, okay, another way if the three-member panel were different. And this brings up the issue of what we have to do, the changes we have to make, not only to the executive branch and not only to the Congress, but we have to motivate also changes to the judiciary. We have a judiciary here which is not even activist when it comes to the issue of our very survival. It could have been activist. It could have decided in favor of the plaintiffs. It didn't have to take its refuge in the cases and controversy doctrine. It did so out of scruples. Those scruples are certainly very important in many, many instances, okay, in many, many cases. We can't have the judiciary branch simply taking over the government when it has a difference of opinion. But when it comes to defending the Constitution, the state, and our very lives, I think that all branches of the government need to be more activist about this, including the courts. And that the courts need to point out that the Congress and the executive branch, both of which have been bought by money, have no right to have had a hand in causing the climate climate emergency, actually causing it, speeding it up, accelerating it over the years with their constant pandering to the fossil fuel industry and their denial of the obvious of what we've been going through. Okay, I've linked to that article on the environment, and I've also linked to the article in the Washington Post, which a lot of the Common Dreams article, okay, is based on. I've also linked but to another article by the managing director of Social Security Works uh, in Truthdig, called "Joe Biden Can't Outrun His Record on Social Security." That's a very good article too. I didn't have time to cover it though tonight. Uh, I gave you a link also to the Bo Knows News thread, the Bo Erickson thread. Also, Lana Dell tells me that there's also a thread that came from the communications director of the Bernie campaign, specifically Brianna Joy Gray. and that she circulated a video clip of Biden accusing the Bernie camp of doctoring the video concerning the comments that were made by Paul Ryan and his comments on what Paul Ryan had said. I wasn't able to find that particular tweet. If I had been able to, I would have included it, in my links here. I'm sure, that it's a pretty essential tweet. There was also a thing which appeared, in MSNBC today that you ought to take a look at, and I left a link to that also, and that was the Joy Ann Reid program, and it featured a body language expert, quote unquote, who, by the way, happens to be a personal friend of Joe Biden for many years, who comes on Joy Reid's program and says that because Bernie begins his sentences sometimes, with well, and also sometimes goes into a turtle-like sort of posture, that this means that he was lying during the Warren exchange. So this is ridiculous. I urge you to read the article and to see the short video. And by the way, one of the claims of the body language expert is that when Bernie was in a turtle position, that his shoulders were as high as his eyes. His shoulders were, at eye level. Now, I looked very carefully for that, and I didn't see his shoulders anywhere near his eye level. So I say so much for that particular body language expert. She can't even get her own story straight. But anyway, you might want to take a look at that particular piece of nonsense just for a laugh and just to demonstrate again what garbage the Joy Reid show is. Pure and total garbage. Okay. Please share, like, and subscribe, and please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'm now going to consider your comments. I hope you've been sharing a lot. I really hope this one gets out to lots and lots of people. I hope it gets out. Okay, I seem to be back, so I'll trust that I'm back. And I'll look at your comments. So, let me go back to the beginning here. I guess we'll have to wait till my scroll bar frees up. It's frozen, as seems to be standard operating procedure down here lately. I don't know why. And Cheyenne says, my finger hit the wrong button. Stupid image. Sorry. Elaine McForbes has joined. Cheyenne says, Warren just voted for Trump's horrific trade deal, by the way. Yeah, I know she did. is awful on that trade deal. And Greg Mallett says Biden loves anything that goes against the best interests of the people. Yes, please do share this. My indicator as yet is not showing very many shares. I really need your help on this. And when it gets on YouTube, please share, like, and subscribe it. And Kay says, he's the worst for everybody, young and old alike. And those in the middle. He's the worst for those in the middle, too. Greg says, yeah, Biden loves the millions he gets from the military industrial complex. I think he gets a lot of money from the pharmaceuticals, too, doesn't he, Greg? Cheyenne says, remember Ramsey Clark, inspector. He released a heartbreaking general. A heartbreaking video. Okay, at the time, if I recall correctly, Ramsey Clark was the Attorney General of the United States, wasn't he? Case says if Biden is the nominee, Dems lose again. He was the Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson, if I recall correctly, for a while, anyway. I agree. And Kay says, my question is, why do people not believe his Social Security cut record, even when you put the C-SPAN videos out there, SMH? Well, they probably do believe it if they take a look at the C-SPAN videos. They probably do believe it. The problem is, they don't take a look. Jeffrey Denton has joined. Hi, Jeffrey. And Cheyenne says, for sure. Kay said, I had to unfriend someone today who didn't believe it and got nasty with me about posting it. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, if you're posting something, they can check it themselves. Kay says, that article is the exact one I posted today. Oh, the Ryan Grimm article. Well, I'm going to tell you. Ryan Grimm is scrupulous about detail and entirely honest. Cheyenne says, I'm not well, signing off. Sorry to hear it, Cheyenne. I hope you feel better tomorrow. Take care of yourself, Cheyenne. Rosemary Robertson is joined. Kay says, thank you, Evelina. I do try to inform people, but I cannot make them listen. We all have that problem. We all have that problem. Okay. Evelina says they'll wake up eventually, keep on keeping on. And that's the only advice I can give too. That's all we can do is keep on keeping on. I will try, but the dumbing down of the U.S. has worked too well. It has. And Evelina says, I always think about what I think Lincoln said. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Something like that. Still, you get the idea. On less than $700 a month Social Security, I hate my life. Yeah, that's pretty tough, Kay. Evelina says, my mom gets 651. Kay says, I'm trying to get it out, Joe. They will not believe me. Well, keep trying, Kay. Just be patient. But don't get angry. Just calmly. It's got to be done calmly. Doesn't do to get angry at people. Just persist. Keep on sending the videos. Sending the videos. Kay says, I worked in healthcare when it was good, but as an aide. I never earned much, although I did learn a lot back then. And Rick Maynard is joined, says, evening all. Hi, Rick. And Evelina says, Reagan. And Kay says, hey, Richard. And Steve Manzo has joined. Dale Weaver has joined. Evelina says, yep. Kay says, Tom Hartman calls that the two Santa Claus theory. GOP and Corp Dems run up the deficit when GOP rules, then bitch about it when Dems are in office. Yep. And Evelina says Obama compromised, got little in return. Obama pre-compromised because he wanted to pre-compromise, because he wanted to reduce the deficit. He wanted to get a reputation for fiscal responsibility, and he did not care who he hurt. In fact, there were economists on Obama's team who were telling him that the stimulus bill, the ARA bill, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, what was it called? I think that's what it was called, or something similar to that. There were economists he had who were recommending a bill that would have totaled $1.8 trillion as opposed to the $800 billion bill that he passed. The $1.8 trillion bill would most probably have ended the recession within 6 months, but he wasn't having it. He gave his people a target of 1 trillion at a maximum. And then after that, he allowed Democrats, and Republicans, to negotiate, certain provisions of the bill that drastically lowered the fiscal multipliers that were gotten out of the stimulus bill. That's why we had the slowest recovery on our record after the Second World War. The slowest recovery on record, thanks to Obama and his pre-compromising and compromising with the Republicans, even when the Republicans would not reciprocate and vote for the bill. Even when they would, it passed without any Republican votes. They got the Democrats to cut a whole bunch of things and put in provisions they want. And the jackass Democrats made the changes and then didn't get a single Republican vote. When they saw they weren't going to get those Republican votes, they should have tanked the whole thing and gone back to the beginning and taken out all the compromises they made. They should have upped the stimulus bill to the 1.8 trillion that it belonged at, and then passed it over the objections of the Republicans anyway, because they didn't get a single damn Republican vote. The whole thing was political malpractice. Kay says all these jackasses need to be voted out. I think they need to live on Social Security and Medicare like the rest of us, and then they might wake up. Maybe. Kay says, I agree with you on the Joy Reid show. Oh, Joy Reid is so awful. What a neoliberal. And Richard Dean Winfield, running for Congress in, if I recall correctly, he's running for the Senate in Georgia this year. And Richard is a strong progressive, not at all a neoliberal. who I will probably be interviewing in the coming weeks. We haven't made the final arrangements yet, but we had a number of interviews in the 2018 campaign when he ran for Congress in the Georgia 10th. And he was a wonderful candidate back in 2018. And I'm sure he'll be a wonderful candidate in this particular Senate race. I suspect he'll be the best candidate. If we could get him elected to the Senate, it would be one of the most wonderful things to happen in the 2020 elections. Evelina says, I have faith. I only worry about whether everybody's vote will get counted, okay, to be precise. Everybody's vote is not going to get counted. It's not going to be counted. They'll have some success in the voter suppression, okay, and in the rigging game. We have to see that it's not so much success that it turns the elections around. We need big margins, big real margins. Kay says, scrap the damn cap and be done with it. Most people don't even understand about the cap. Scrapping the cap is fine. I'm all for scrapping the cap because the wealthy are too wealthy and they need to be taxed in the Social Security area at the same rate, okay, that all the rest of us are. Okay. However, paying for Social Security is not about the trust fund. Paying for Social Security is about congressional appropriations for Social Security. We need to make those appropriations by 2 years ahead. In other words, when we make the appropriation for next year should have been made actually last year, so that it's always made in advance, so that it becomes an automatic part of the budget. That's what we need to get the Congress to do. K. Clark Ryan says that Larson out of Connecticut, I think has a good Social Security expansion plan, but I doubt it will pass in this screwed up government. That may be true, but I don't think anything's going to pass in this government. I think we have to wait until 2021. Thankfully, we have only a little more than a year to go. In fact, we have less than a year until a new Congress can start to pass things. We have roughly a year and 2 days until the new president takes office. Hopefully, that new president will be Bernie Sanders. Kay says, I heard about that case being dismissed yesterday. Damn sad. Well, it's not a final dismissal yet. It still may be heard, Kay, on an en banc basis. And Lana says, I tagged you in a few spots on Twitter for that. Thank you, Lana. I would look. Kay says, I agree with you on Joy Reid. Show Joe. And Kay says, Obama was a corporate Dem, although he campaigned as a progressive. As soon as I saw his administration, I saw the truth. Ernest Jones has joined. And Lana says, thank you. The SS Trust Fund is a glorified spreadsheet. Indeed, Lana, it's a glorified spreadsheet. Absolutely. Okay, I'm through with the comments right now. If you have any more, then please deliver them quickly, because if you don't have any more, then I will say good night. By the way, I'll see you on Monday night during the 9 o'clock hour, when I'll talk about some more great things. I hope you've shared a lot here tonight. If you haven't already, please do so now. And again, please share, like, and subscribe the video when it goes up, okay, on YouTube. And please do visit my Patreon account from time to time. That would be a very nice thing to do, and I would greatly appreciate it. There is a new comment I see. As soon as my scroll bar unwinds. Russell says, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you, Russell. I certainly will. And Kay says, thank you for being here, Joe. I always enjoy like minded discussions. And Evelina says, thank you, Dr. Joe. And Mad Hildebrand has joined. Hey, Matt, are you running this year? Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, I'll say good night until Monday during the 9 o'clock hour. Thank you once again for coming.